The sensors picked it up first. A Theresi survey ship passing through the outer systems logged the data the way it logged everything. Clean numbers, no feeling, just coordinates and mass readings. The report said, debris field, unnatural origin, high carbon content, residual heat signatures consistent with recent atmospheric burn. It did not say 4.2 million people. It didn't need to. The numbers said it well enough. The Galactic Council chamber held 61 species and smelled like all of them at once. The ceiling was high enough that the top of it disappeared into shadow. The floor was polished to a shine that reflected every delegate back at themselves, warped and stretched, like looking at something true about yourself in a spoon. Ambassador Yara Osei sat at the human seat, third row, left side. She had a pen in front of her, standard issue, the kind you could find on any station, in any system. She set it parallel to the edge of the table. She straightened it. The Keth delegation sat across the chamber, 12 of them. Their bodies were long and pale, and their fingers had one extra joint that always made humans look twice. The lead delegate, a Keth named Vor Sateth, had the posture of someone who had already decided how the day would end before it started. Speaker Velshath opened the session. He was old, ancient really, by most measurements, and his voice had the sound of something that had said difficult things for a very long time, and had learned how to carry the weight of them. He named what had happened to New Carthage. He said the word tragedy. He said unprovoked. He let the silence after each word do its work. Then he gave the floor to the Keth. Vor Sateth stood. He said that the colony had been situated in a region of contested space. He said that the Keth had a territorial mandate to protect their borders. He said that the loss of life was, and he paused here with something that was almost care, regrettable. He said it the way a person says regrettable about rain at a picnic. Yara straightened her pen. The next 3 hours were speeches. 12 species filed formal censures. 2 requested emergency arbitration. 1, the Vreth, who had long memories and said very little, simply noted the event and said nothing more. Their silence was a different shape than everyone else's. A Theresi delegate proposed a joint commission. A Pelhari delegate proposed sanctions. A delegate from a species so small its name took 4 seconds to pronounce proposed a resolution condemning the use of force against civilian populations. Vor Sateth accepted all of it the way you accept a parking citation on a day when much larger things are happening to you, unworried. Yara said nothing. She straightened her pen. When Velshath finally looked to her, the way everyone in that room had been looking to her all morning, waiting for the grief to surface, for the human representative to do the thing humans did, which was to feel things loudly and visibly, she stood up. She was not tall, she was not loud. She had a face that gave nothing away without her permission. She said, "Earth requests a recess of 72 standard hours." The room waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. Velshath asked carefully, "For what purpose, Ambassador?" "Internal consultation." He looked at her for a long moment. He was old enough to have looked at a great many faces in difficult moments. He thought he recognized what he saw. He thought, grief does strange things to people. Let them have their time. He granted the recess. Earth went quiet. Not the quiet of shock. Not the quiet of mourning, which has a texture to it, a softness, a leaking quality, the kind of quiet that is actually full of low sounds if you listen close enough. This quiet was different. Every human diplomatic channel switched to read only. Messages could come in. Nothing went out. Human trade vessels across 4 sectors pulled into neutral stations and docked. They did not file departure requests. They did not file anything. They sat. On 12 colony worlds, children were moved inside. The official reason given was atmospheric maintenance drills. The drills had not been scheduled. Nobody asked follow-up questions, because the children moved calmly and the adults moved calmly, and everything about it had the feel of a thing that had been practiced before. A human cargo pilot on Velshot's own station paid for his fuel with a cheerful nod at the dock worker, topped off his ship to maximum, and went and sat in a bar and ordered a meal and ate it very slowly. When the bar owner asked where he was headed next, he said, "Oh, just waiting on something." He smiled when he said it. It was a perfectly friendly smile. The dock worker thought about it later. The smile was the thing that stayed with her. Not worried, not sad, patient. In the council building, 3 analysts spent the first day reviewing human military registrations. They found 40 warships on record. Defense budgets that seemed designed by people who had genuinely bigger concerns. They went home that night feeling better. On the second day, a junior aide, new to her post, still at the stage where she checked her work twice, raised her hand in the middle of a briefing and asked a question. She asked why the human military records only went back 40 years. The room got quiet in a new way. A senior analyst explained, before the Unification Compact, human nations had maintained separate defense systems, separate registrations, separate everything. The junior aide asked if those had been dissolved after unification. No one answered her. She asked again. No one answered her again. But this time, it was not because they hadn't heard her. It was because the senior analyst had started pulling older records, and his face had changed in a way that made answering feel less important than reading. On the third day, Yara sat alone in her quarters. She had a photograph. She looked at it for a while. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, the one close to her chest. She buttoned the jacket. She had eaten a full dinner. She had done it without thinking about it. Her hands were steady. She lay down. She did not stare at the ceiling. She did not think about New Carthage in the specific way a person thinks about something that needs to be thought about. She had done that thinking. It lived somewhere that wasn't in the way. She slept a full 8 hours. In the morning, the recess would end, and she would walk back into that chamber, and the galaxy would be watching her face for grief, and she would give them something else entirely. But that was the morning. For now, she slept. Outside the station, the stars held still and cold and indifferent, the way they always had, the way they always would, completely unaware that something had just changed and could not be changed back. The signal came at the exact moment the 72 hours ended. Not 1 minute early, not 1 minute late. The timestamp was clean and precise in the way that a very sharp thing is clean and precise. The kind of accuracy that is not about technology, it is about intention. Every diplomatic frequency in the galaxy received it at the same time. There was no priority routing, no separate transmission for allied species versus neutral ones. Everyone got it together, the way you give everyone in a room the same piece of news when you want no one to hear it secondhand and change the shape of it. The format was standard. The header was the header used for all formal interstellar declarations, trade pacts, border treaties, the documents that structured how civilized species related to one another across the dark distances. Species had seen this header hundreds of times. It meant something official is about to be said. A synthesized voice began to read. It named the Keth Dominion. Then it listed incidents, in order, by date, going back 214 years, each one cross-referenced, each one time-stamped, each one noted with the human worlds or vessels or people it had affected. The voice did not rush. It did not slow down for the bigger ones. It gave every item on the list exactly the same weight, which was its own kind of statement. 14 minutes of listening before the list was done. 847 items. New Carthage was item 847. The document did not call for a tribunal. It did not request reparations. It did not extend an invitation to negotiate. It said, in 5 words, that Earth declared a state of war against the Keth Dominion, effective immediately. Then the signal ended. In the Keth delegation's private chamber, Vorsadith listened to the whole thing without moving. When it finished, he sat still for a moment. Then he laughed. Not cruelly, genuinely, the laugh of someone who has heard an absurd thing and cannot help responding to it honestly. 40 ships. Humans had 40 registered warships. He had seen the numbers himself. He had people who checked these things. 40 ships against the Keth Dominion was not a war. It was a gesture. It was the galactic equivalent of throwing a shoe. He was still smiling when he called his fleet commander. He told him to prepare a correction fleet. Not a war fleet. A demonstration. Something that would make the humans understand the distance between declaring a thing and being able to carry it out. He said to make it visible. Something the whole sector could see. 400 ships, he said, should be enough to make the point. Velshath read the declaration 4 times. He was looking for the clause he had missed. The part where it pivoted into a demand that could be met. The section that revealed this was diplomatic theater, high-stakes posturing designed to force a better settlement offer. He had seen it before. Species did it. It was a known move. There was no such clause. He read it again. He didn't drink it. He pulled the human military registration files again. 40 ships. A defense budget that looked like a small city's infrastructure spending. He looked at these numbers the way you look at a lock, when you are certain you have the right key, and it will not turn. He called in the junior aide, the one who had asked the question on the second day. He asked her, what had she found? She had found that before the Unification Compact, Earth alone had maintained the militaries of over 190 separate nations, that these forces had never been formally dissolved, that the Compact had unified human governance, but had not included a provision requiring full military disclosure to the Galactic Council, because at the time of signing, no one on the Council had thought to ask for it. There was a protocol, she explained. A species had to volunteer the registration. Humans had registered 40 ships. Velshath asked if she thought those were all the ships. The junior aide looked at him. She was 12 days into her first posting, and she had not yet learned how to make her face say less than she was thinking. She did not answer him out loud. She didn't need to. 3 species that shared borders with the Keth began quietly rerouting their trade convoys that afternoon. They said nothing publicly. They filed no statements. They simply began choosing paths that placed more distance between their shipping lanes and Keth's space. They had dealt with the Keth for a long time. They knew how to read a room. The Vreth Trade Collective, who had long memories and short words, sent a single transmission to all neutral parties. It was 4 sentences. It recommended suspending all investment in Keth territorial ventures, pending a review of market stability. It cited no specific cause. Every species that received it understood exactly what it meant. Yara was walking back from the council chamber when a Keth diplomat caught up to her in the corridor. His name was long, and she had never bothered to shorten it. He was younger than Vorsadith, and still had the kind of confidence that had not yet been taught anything by events. He fell into step beside her. He said that surely this was theater, that everyone understood the human government needed to respond in a way that satisfied public emotion back home, that there were frameworks for this kind of thing, that the Keth were, despite everything, reasonable. He said, "You cannot seriously—" Yara stopped walking. Her face did the same thing it had done in the council chamber for 3 days, which was nothing at all. She said, "We don't miscount." She walked away. He stood in the corridor and watched her go, and felt the first real drop of cold in his chest, the kind that comes not from fear exactly, but from the sudden revision of a calculation you had been sure of. On the dark side of Earth's moon, a structure sat that most Galactic Council records listed as a decommissioned industrial complex. It was not decommissioned. It had never been decommissioned. It had been quiet. There is a difference between those two things. The lights came on at the 72-hour mark, at the exact same moment as the signal. Every light. All at once. The structure was large enough that it had its own internal weather, moisture in the air at the higher levels, the kind of low cloud that forms when a space is big enough and warm enough and has been sealed long enough. The doors at the far end began to open. They were not small doors. They took 11 minutes to open fully. What came out first was not a warship. It was a carrier. The kind of vessel that carries other vessels inside it, the way a thing carries its purpose. Not on its surface, but deep in its center, where the whole structure is built around it. Behind the carrier came another. Then another. Then the galaxy began to understand, slowly, and with the particular sick clarity of a thing you cannot unknow once you know it, that 40 had never been the number. 40 had been what they'd been told. There is a difference between those two things as well. The Keth fleet arrived at the coordinates 3 days after the declaration. 412 ships. The lead vessel alone was longer than most stations. The formation was precise, the kind of precision that signals confidence without effort. The way a very large animal moves through space it knows belongs to it. The fleet commander's log, recovered much later, referred to the operation as a corrective demonstration. The word war did not appear in the log at all. The word concern did not appear either. The word that appeared most was efficient, as in, this would be efficient, as in, the response would be measured and efficient, and the humans would understand what they had miscalculated, and the matter would be resolved efficiently. The fleet commander had done this kind of thing before. Smaller species sometimes needed correcting. It was not pleasant, but it was clean work, and the Keth were good at clean work. He was not concerned. He would be given no time to become concerned. Fleet Admiral Ren Vasquez stood at the center of his command deck and looked at the Keth formation on his screen. He was a compact man, with a face that looked like it had decided a long time ago not to show anything it hadn't agreed to show. His crew moved around him with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained for this, and trained for this, and trained for this some more, and were now here, at the thing they had trained for, and were not surprised to find themselves ready. Vasquez looked at the sensor count. He started counting out loud. He did this when he was thinking. His crew had learned this about him years ago, and had stopped asking if he was talking to them. He was talking to himself. It was how he organized the world. Plus support craft, probably another 30 behind the formation. Flagship is the one at the front, which is where I'd put it if I wanted to signal I wasn't afraid. He paused. They should be afraid. His second-in-command, a woman named Dias, who had been with him since before the compact, pulled up the engagement orders on her screen and said nothing. She had learned, over many years of standing next to this man, that his counting meant he was already in the fight. The fight just hadn't caught up to him yet. The Keth fleet held at the edge of range and broadcast a standard warning signal. It was the galactic equivalent of knocking on a door very hard. It said, "Stand down, submit to inspection, and the response will be proportional." Vasquez looked at the broadcast timestamp. He looked at his crew. He said, "They think we're going to stand in one place." Then he gave the order to move. The Keth tactical models were built on a specific understanding of how fleet engagements worked. Species chose a position and defended it. They formed lines. They traded fire across defined distances. There were protocols. There were patterns. The models had cataloged 300 years of interstellar combat and identified the patterns so thoroughly that any engagement could be predicted within acceptable margins before it began. The models had not been built with humans in mind. Humanity did not form lines. 6 separate groups of human ships came in from 6 different angles at the same time. using approach vectors that pass through their own theoretical crossfire zones. The Keth computers identified this immediately as suicidal overlap, as the kind of tactical error made by a species that did not understand the geometry of weapons fire. The computers were not wrong about the geometry. They were wrong about whether humans cared. The Keth fleet did the logical thing, which was to begin organizing a response to the most immediate threat vector. They were very good at this. They began well. They did not finish. Vasquez counted. 340, 280, 210. A hit on the ship to his left, minor. It kept moving. 160, 112. Dias was coordinating the second group without looking up. Her voice had the sound of someone doing math they have done before, reading results they recognize. 61, 40, 22. A long pause. 14. The command deck was quiet now, except for the sounds of systems running. They let him count. 4. The screens showed what the screens showed. Vasquez said, "Central Command, this is Vasquez. Engagement complete." A pause on the line. Central Command asked for the engagement time. Vasquez checked. He said, 36 minutes. Another pause, longer. They asked for fleet loss figures. He said, 7. The line went silent for 11 seconds. Vasquez watched the seconds tick. He was still counting. Then, "Say again, Admiral. 7 vessels, none catastrophic. All crews recovered or in recovery." He waited a beat. "Request new targeting package when available." The line stayed quiet a moment more. He understood the quiet. Command was doing the same thing every Keth commander had been doing for the past 3 days, which was looking at numbers, and looking at them again, and waiting for them to say something different. Vasquez had checked. He added, "Ask me again in a century." He ended the transmission. Velshoth received the sensor data 20 minutes later. It had been passed to him through a Theresi intelligence contact. The data was raw. Ship signatures, timestamps, energy readings. He sat in his private office, and he read it the way he had read the declaration, the way he had read everything in the past 4 days, which was carefully, and then again, and then a third time. He was looking for the part that made sense in the way he was used to things making sense. 412 Keth ships. 36 minutes. 7 human losses. He set the data down on his desk. He pressed his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the wall across from him, which was plain and offered him nothing. He had mediated 217 conflicts in his career. He had sat across from species who were genuinely dangerous, genuinely angry, genuinely capable of great destruction, and he had talked them to tables and tables to treaties. He was good at it. He was, by most measures, the best at it. He thought about the declaration, the 5 words at the end of 847 items. He thought about Yara's face in the council chamber, the pen, the way she had slept. And she had slept. His aide had confirmed it, full 8 hours, because he had needed to know, while 4.2 million people's debris was still cooling in the outer dark. He thought about 36 minutes. He said, very quietly, to the empty room, "They weren't declaring war." He sat with it. They were informing us. Outside his window, the station turned slowly through its orbit, the stars swinging past in their long arc, indifferent and ancient, and the same as they had always been, completely unchanged, which was the most frightening thing of all. Some things change, and nothing looks different. The galaxy looked exactly the same as it had 1 week ago. The Council convened an emergency session the morning after the engagement data came in. This was the thing the Council was very good at: convening, gathering, filling a room with representatives and giving that gathering a shape and a process. There was comfort in procedure when the alternative was sitting alone with what you had just learned. Velshoth opened the session. He looked older than he had a week ago, though it had only been a week. Some things age you in hours. Proposals came quickly. A ceasefire framework, immediate stand-down of all human forces pending third-party arbitration, a reparations commission with the authority to compel Keth contribution, a formal mediation process under the Council's authority, which had successfully resolved 42 border conflicts and 8 full-scale wars in the past century. The numbers were respectable. The record was real. They transmitted everything to the human delegation. Earth acknowledged receipt of each proposal, formally, correctly, with the proper timestamp and the proper confirmation codes. Then Earth continued. Velshoth's aide brought him tea throughout the session. He was on his 3rd cup before he noticed he had not drunk any of it. The cups sat beside him in a row, cooling, each one a small record of how long he had been sitting at this table, not solving this problem. He requested a private meeting with the human ambassador. She came. She sat across from him in the small room off the main chamber. She did not bring anything with her. No notes, no tablet. She folded her hands on the table. He said he needed to understand what Earth wanted, not politically, not in diplomatic language, just the actual thing, the real condition. He had been doing this work for longer than most species had been spacefaring. He had sat across from everyone. He had found a way to the table every time, because there was always a way, and the way was always through understanding what the other side actually needed, underneath the stated position. He said, "Name the condition. Just one. Give me something to work with." Yara looked at him. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might say something real. The kind of real that only happens in small rooms when no one is watching, and the formal version of a person relaxes for just a moment. She said, "Read line 1 of the declaration." He knew line 1. He had memorized the whole document. Line 1 named the first incident, 214 years ago. A human research vessel destroyed in disputed space. Crew of 9, no survivors, never formally acknowledged by the Keth. He wanted her to say something else. She did not say something else. He said he understood, line 1. He was asking about now. About what would end this now. Yara said, "We got to 847 because line 1 was never resolved." She stood up. She buttoned her jacket. She thanked him for his time, which was the diplomatic version of a door closing. She left. Velshoth sat with his cold tea. His aide brought another cup. He let it cool. 3 species filed what looked like routine trade route adjustments that week. The adjustments moved their supply convoys away from Keth territorial borders. Standard stuff. Any conflict in a region caused shipping to reroute, and the algorithms that managed galactic trade flows did this automatically when risk thresholds were crossed. No one paid much attention. What the standard analysis missed was the destination changes. Not away from Keth space. Toward specific coordinates. Coordinates that sat at the edges of human fleet staging areas. Convoys that arrived with their transponder identification codes stripped. Technically a customs violation, practically invisible to the systems that tracked such things, because the systems had been designed by species who assumed the only reason to strip a code was smuggling. The Vreth did not smuggle. They were too careful for smuggling. What they were doing was choosing a side without saying the word choosing. 2 other species followed within 48 hours. Quietly. No statements, no explanations. Just fuel and materials appearing at human waypoints the way water finds its own level. Simply, without drama, as though no other direction made sense. Vasquez flagged it in his log. He listed the cargo types, the estimated values, the likely origin species. Then he added a line that sat differently than the rest of the entry, which was all data and coordinates. "We're not alone in this room." He did not explain it. His crew had seen the manifests. They knew what it meant when species who had said nothing publicly began moving resources without being asked. It meant something older than politics, something that lived below the level where diplomats operated. It meant, we remember what they did to us too. The Keth Strategic Council met behind closed doors. They had the best analysts in their sector. The models they used had been refined over centuries of managing a dominion that spanned 42 systems. The models were good at predicting outcomes. They had been built to be good at this because a dominion that could not predict outcomes could not remain a dominion for long. The analysts ran the engagement data. The models produced an outcome projection. The analysts checked it and ran it again. Same outcome. They ran it a third time with revised fleet estimates, revised upward because the registered number was clearly wrong. They tripled the estimate. Then they tripled it again because the engagement had suggested even that was low. They added the resource convoys from the 3 supporting species. They added estimated reserve capacity. They put in the most pessimistic numbers they had. The ones that assumed humanity was hiding twice what they thought humanity was hiding. Same outcome. The outcome did not include the Keth Dominion continuing to exist in its current form. One analyst said out loud that perhaps the model needed recalibration. The room got very quiet. Nobody agreed with him. Nobody disagreed either. They sat with the numbers, and the numbers did not change. The lead analyst sent a private message to Vorsafeth. The message contained the data and one sentence. The sentence said, they were not posturing. That night on a Keth world called Veldara, the city lights came on, as they always did, at dark. Children played in the streets below the towers. A small girl, maybe 9 years old, looked up through a gap in the buildings at the sky above. She had heard adults talking in low voices that day. She had heard the word humans more than once. She knew humans were far away. She knew the sky was very big. She looked at it anyway. The stars were the same as they always were, distant and cold, and scattered across the dark, without any concern for what happened below them. But something had changed. She could not have said what. She did not have the words for it yet. She would have them later, years later, when she was old enough for the words to fit what she remembered feeling in that moment. For now she only knew that the sky felt different than it had yesterday, like something behind it had shifted, like the dark was leaning in. The Keth Strategic Council stopped responding on all frequencies on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday, not a Tuesday that felt different from the outside. The lights were still on in the capital. Veldara still had its morning markets. The administrative networks were still technically active. But the frequencies that mattered, the military command channels, the diplomatic lines, the secure communications between the 42 systems of the Dominion went quiet one by one over the course of 6 hours, like lights being turned off in a building at the end of the workday. Vasquez logged the time and moved to the next targeting package. His crew did not celebrate. They were not the celebrating type, or perhaps they had not yet located the feeling that would come later, the one that needed a name and a quiet room and time. There was still work. The work was not fully done. They did the work. 47 days after the Keth Strategic Council fell silent, the government that replaced it filed for formal recognition with the Galactic Council. The new government was smaller. It controlled 7 systems instead of 42. It used the word historic a great many times in its recognition request, and the word regrettable not at all, which was a kind of progress. The galaxy named the period the correction. Humans, privately, in the way humans named things privately when they were not being diplomatic about it, called it Tuesday. They did not say this out loud in council chambers. They had learned, over 200 years of galactic diplomacy, the gap between what you said out loud and what you said in the corridors when only your own people were listening. It was a wide gap. They had been storing things in it for a long time. The council offered Earth a permanent seat 3 weeks after the correction ended. Not asked, offered. with the particular speed of people who have understood something and are trying to build a structure around it before the ground shifts again. The seat they offered was the largest at the table. Nobody discussed how this had been decided. Nobody discussed quite a few things, in the polite and practical way that species have of agreeing to look forward, when the alternative is spending a great deal of time looking at something uncomfortable. Yara accepted the seat on behalf of Earth. She said thank you. She meant neither word. She sat in the seat. She put her pen on the table in front of her. She did not straighten it. Around her the chamber filled with 61 species who were recalculating, all of them in their own ways, how the room had changed, who was large now, and who was small, where the weight had moved to. It was the same process that had been running since the Declaration, a long, slow revision of an understanding that had been built on bad numbers and comfortable assumptions, and 2 centuries of not asking the right questions. Yara let them recalculate. She had time. Velshoth asked to see her alone on the last day of the first new session. He had requested this meeting carefully, not through official channels, not through aides. He came to her directly, which was unusual for him, and she noticed it. He was old enough that direct requests meant something. He was too careful a person to do anything without meaning it. They sat in the same small room as before. His hands were folded on the table. Her hands were folded on the table. Between them was an empty space that held the weight of the conversation they were about to have. He said he needed to understand one thing, just one, not for his notes or his records or the formal history that would eventually be written about this period. For himself, because he was old, and he had spent his whole life believing that there was always a way to the table, and the way was always through language, and this had shaken something in the architecture of that belief, and he needed to set it right before he was done. He said, "What would it have taken? Name one condition, give me one thing that if it had been done would have changed this outcome." Yara was quiet. She picked up the pen from her jacket pocket, not the pen on the table, her pen, the one she had been carrying since the session on the first day. She looked at it. She set it on the table between them. She did not straighten it. She said, "You had 200 years of conditions, 846 of them, before New Carthage. All they required was acknowledgement. You kept losing the paperwork." Velshoth said nothing. "We don't lose paperwork," she said. He looked at her for a long time. She stood up. She left the pen on the table, the first time it had been out of her hand or her pocket since the first session, the first time she had put it down somewhere and walked away from it. He noticed this. He thought it might mean something, but he was not sure he had the vocabulary for what it meant. She buttoned her jacket. She said, "Noted, Speaker." She walked out. Vasquez's fleet was reassigned to patrol duties 6 weeks later. Standard rotation, the kind of assignment that follows a conflict, when the loud part is over and the long part begins. He accepted the orders. He wrote a short personal log entry and then deleted most of it, and left only a list of names, the 7 crews from the engagement, the names of the 7 ships. He kept that. Some things needed to be written down. He understood this better now than he had before. Yara took leave. She filed it formally. 2 weeks. Personal reasons. She did not specify. She boarded a small ship, not a diplomatic vessel, not a military one, a cargo ship with a quiet crew, who did not ask questions. She gave them coordinates. They flew for 3 days. The coordinates put them at the edge of what had been the New Carthage outer system. There was nothing there now. The debris had spread in the months since. Spread thin, the way things spread when there is a great deal of space and not enough material to fill it. You had to know what you were looking at to see it at all. You had to already know what had been there. She stood at the viewport for a long time. She took the photograph out of her jacket pocket. It was a girl, standing outside a school building, squinting into bright sun, a gap-toothed smile aimed at whoever was holding the camera. Behind her, the school had a sign, but the angle made it hard to read all of it. You could see the letters "New Cart" before the frame cut off. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that was Yara's own, 20 years younger and slightly more uneven, the handwriting of someone who had not yet learned to keep everything controlled. "See you at the holidays." She had not gone that holiday. There had been a conference, a summit, something that had seemed important at the time, and which she could no longer remember clearly. She had sent a message instead. The girl had sent one back. They had said they would do it the next holiday. They had not done it the next holiday either. Then there had been no more holidays to plan for. Yara looked at the debris field a long time. The war was over. The grief had been waiting behind it, patient as a stone, the way grief always waits, not going anywhere, not asking anything, simply there, simply present, simply the thing that remains when everything else has been resolved. It had a place to stand now. She let it stand. Outside the viewport, the stars held their light across distances too large to feel, and the dark between them said nothing, and the debris said nothing, and the photograph in her hands said only what it had always said, which was the name of a person who had existed, and mattered, and deserved to be remembered. She stayed at the viewport until the crew told her they needed to begin the return trip. She put the photograph back in her pocket. Close to her chest, she said, "Whenever you're ready." They flew home.